Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, as I mentioned last week, I made my long-delayed return to Washington, D.C. for a pharma workshop, and it went just fine. There's all sorts of inside baseball stuff I could talk about, but anyway, it went fine. And I stayed at the DuPont Circle Hotel where I used to stay in the before time. That meant I got to go visit Second Story Books and Kramer's Books in the evening because it's my day of nightlife. I'll be back down there next week for some lobbying visits on the Hill, which means I may have to put a tie on for the first time in quite a while. It's kind of funny transitioning back into that self, because without that Gil, we wouldn't have the resources to indulge this Gil, you know? Oh, and I should mention that another Gil got to... I got to celebrate his second birthday yesterday. See, it turns out January 30th is the anniversary of the first time that 50-year-old Gil picked up a pencil and sketch pad and tried to draw some trees in the backyard. To celebrate, I picked up a pencil and sketch pad and tried to draw some trees in my backyard. It came out okay. Haven't been drawing much lately for a variety of anxiety, spiral, and blah, blah, blah reasons. But it felt good to return to the scene of the artistic crime, as it were. And I hope it jumpstarts me because, that Gil's been pretty quiet lately. And the longer the silence goes on, the more oppressive it gets, if you get me. So, without getting into too much of an identity crisis, let's get to this week's show. My guest this time is Thomas Woodruff, who has a mind-blowing new book out called Francis Rothbart! The Tale of a Fastidious Feral from Fantagraphics. It is a graphic opera, as Thomas describes it, which is a better term than anything I could come up with. Now, as you'll get from the moment the conversation starts, this book is unlike anything I've ever read. The modes of graphic storytelling that he deploys, the poetry of the language, the absolutely ornate artwork and lettering, and the gorgeous and grotesque story that it tells. Francis Rothbart is an absolute wonder of a book. Now, the short description, and Thomas will give a longer one in our talk, Francis is a boy who gets orphaned and accidentally abandoned in remote woods and is raised by an albino fox and some magpies from baby into toddler status onwards. He gets struck by lightning a few times, is discovered by townspeople, and fashions increasingly elaborate costumes to blend in with a festival. Which, now that I describe it, makes graphic opera sound pretty appropriate, all things considered. But there's so much going on within this book, and the artwork, over 300 pages, is just impossibly lush and beautiful, even as Francis degenerates into utter savagery. I mean, you can only get hit by lightning so many times before it starts to mess with you. And as Thomas will admit during this episode, the book isn't easy on the reader, and it's definitely not for kids. But to me, it's an absolute signal achievement. I mean, Francis Rothbart flat out blew my mind and expanded my notion of what comics can do. So, in addition to thanking Thomas, I have to thank cartoonist and past guest Tom Hart for turning me onto it. And we should also thank Fantagraphics for publishing the thing. It's oversized, about I guess 11 by 15 pages, inch pages, hardcover. And again, I can't even describe the artwork. You'll have to look at the show and episode notes for this one. I'll include a page or two in there, and you'll see a little of what it is that makes this book so special. So anyway, on Saturday, I drove up the Hudson to Thomas's home and studio so we could talk about the book and his art and his history and his career at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, from which he retired recently. And we were surrounded by these oversized canvases of dinosaur paintings that are part of a series he's been making for a few years now. And I had two enormous ones in the background, but behind Thomas while I was talking to him, and just what they mean. And these are dinosaurs facing the moment of the asteroid hitting. And, we'll talk about that art and what it means also. But it was just a joy to sit in the noontime light of an artist's studio and spend an afternoon with someone who clearly lives and breathes art and also wears it. I mean, he's covered in tattoos, which became part of the conversation and got me thinking about a new one. But as Thomas is the first new guest I've recorded with this year, the first couple of episodes have been with repeat guests. I'm awfully glad I can keep meeting and discovering and sitting down and having conversations with such interesting people on a weekly basis. Anyway, here's Thomas's bio from the book. Mr. Thomas Woodruff is an artist who loves to draw and tell stories and make lots and lots of pictures of lots of unusual things. His right hand has had a pencil or a crayon or a brush clenched in it from a precociously early age. Like any honorary member of the Corvidae family, Woodruff has been attracted to shiny things. In his long, varied, and eccentric career, he has had 30 one-person exhibitions of his paintings, created hundreds of illustrations for books, periodicals, and television, designed for the opera, and curated gallery exhibitions. Woodruff is Chair Emeritus of the Illustration and Cartooning Departments at the School of Visual Arts, where he held the post for 20 years. He spends half of his time in New York City and the other half in the Hudson Valley, observing the weeds, sparrows, rabbits, and skunks. Francis Rothbart is his first work of comic art, and this graphic opera was 7 years in the making. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Thomas Woodruff. So, I've been reading comics for 50 years, and I'm 52 now, and I have to say, we're going to call Francis Rothbart a comic, or graphic novel, however we want to.
I call it a graphic opera.
Graphic opera is also good, because I have never read anything like this in my life. You absolutely blew my mind. The integration of the art, the writing, the modes of storytelling, everything you did that went into this, I've literally never seen anything like it. And so, to start with, holy crap, thank you. That's
oh my God.
We'll go with that. But the next question is, where did it start? How did this all come together? And we'll talk about process and such later, but, tell me where this book began.
Well, actually, when I read Chris Ware's Jimmy Corrigan, mm-hmm. and I finished it, I closed the book, and I was really jealous I hadn't made it myself.
You are not the only one. He raised the bar for a lot of cartoonists and illustrators.
It was sort of the great American novel done with this beautiful drawing. And I was very moved, and I always then had in the back of my head that I wanted to make the craziest comic I could come up with. And I never really read comics very much when I was a kid. I was reading books. And then when I became the chair of illustration and cartooning, I surrounded myself with all of these amazing cartoonists. And I would critique comics, but I had never made one. I understood the formal aspects of it, but I had never actually sat down and made one. So then I had these notes that I had made a long time ago for a puppet show, actually, like a theater piece, because I had a background when I was in college of working in avant-garde theater. I worked with Robert Wilson for many years. And so I thought of this as a sort of theatrical thing using scale and size. He actually originally got bigger instead of having the different parts of him enlarge. Yeah. And so when I finally figured out that I could do it as a story, I started slowly, and then it just it started to build, and it took 7 years to do. And I realized how difficult doing comics actually is. It's really hard. And
to be fair, you jumped in with a 300-page painted, designed extravaganza. You weren't doing like a mini comic to start with.
No, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it.
Oh yeah, I'm with you. But you didn't go into the deep end.
Well, yeah, and I work on projects basically. I work on big projects, and I have painted 365 Apple paintings. And I did a book before this called The Freak Parade, which were 32 large drawings that all linked up together as a sort of marching parade. And I've done variations on all different kinds of things in series. So the idea of doing the book like this was not an enormous jump, but it was an incredible challenge. Yeah. An incredible challenge.
Yeah, what did you have to learn? Knowing that you had that intellectual base of comics, what did the practice teach you?
Well, I would try to get a page done a week. Mm-hmm. And I would very carefully do the layouts as spreads. And I would write I had an outline first, and then I would actually specifically write the text. And then I would figure out how the text would go onto the pages, and then I'd kind of render the pages, and then I'd sort of put them on the wall all around the space. And then when I ran out of space, I'd start again and put them all up again. And eventually it started to make sense. But I did do, it's drawn on this sort of tannish brown paper, and with carbon pencil heightened with white charcoal pencil. And that's been my kind of go-to drawing method from when I was in college. I started to draw. They actually don't make the paper anymore, which is very upsetting to me.
I've run into that with artists also, like the material or whatever it is that you used to rely on that's long gone.
Yeah, the art supplies are going quickly. And I actually had to track down the last of the paper in Florence. And I was dealing with some guy, and I charmed him, and he sent me the last that he had of it. But that was my sort of go-to thing. I don't like working in ink, and I like to erase if I need to.
And I've got a question about that too, but go on. Yeah.
And actually, my husband Fred made a joke that I should have kept the hundreds of electric pencil sharpeners that I went through.
I will tell you. I will send you a picture when I'm home. I have one from 1978. It has the torque of a jet engine, and it still works after 45 years.
Well,
it's incredible.
The carbon pencils.
Yeah, they're going to.
The carbon pencils are hard to get, because you need a sharp point, and so I went through all these different brands. It was ridiculous with the pencil sharpeners. I always had one on hand in case the motor ran out.
Sure.
And it was So it actually kind of evolved naturally. And then time went by, and it got more complicated, and it got more complicated, and it got more complicated. But I always knew with the text that it would be complicated.
In terms of the operatic, or we'll just say the song and poetic nature of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, writing the text was some of the most challenging parts to do because, I wanted it to have this kind of rhymed thing. I wanted to have sections of it that were written in a kind of different style. I wanted to have a section that had very little text at all. So I wanted to sort of give it a structure to the text, and then that was complemented by the visuals. I must say too that this is also indebted to the Google image. So that basically what I would do is I would print out, child standing on his head, or, I could find all of the sort of references that I needed for a given page, and then not copy it, but adjust it and yeah. But that was something that, in the olden days of getting your reference materials, it was very, very hard. But with the Google image, you can find just about anything quickly.
But still, 7 years.
Yeah, still 7 years.
Yeah.
But
did you discover aspects of comics making? Like when you described the paper and the carbon pencil and everything, was there ever an issue with, that's not actually going to reproduce? Did you run into any...
No, because the truth is that most comics, and when I was teaching the comics, it was something that I kept saying over and over again. The conventions of traditional comics are based on bad printing.
Yeah.
And there's no such thing as bad printing anymore. And I would always print these books every year of the best of the seniors' cartooning works. And I would have a problem because the printing was so good, sometimes their work looked bad because they were sort of making it to kind of conform to these old rules of how things are printed.
Gotcha. So did the story change for you from what your initial conception of it?
Not all that much.
Okay.
It remained pretty consistent.
In fact, you should describe the story, because in the intro, I'll talk about the mind-blowingness of it, but I will not do justice as well as you can to actually saying what is Francis Rothbart.
Oh, no.
The tale of a fastidious
Pharaoh. Fastidious Pharaoh. Well, it's about a child that is left in the woods as his parents are killed by lightning. And he's raised by an albino wolf and an albino fox and magpies, and he's sort of raised by the rest of the animals, and then a pair of girls, twins, discover him. And when they discover him, they get upset. I'll just say that. And they go back to the town and tell the town that there's this monster in the rocks, which is where he's abandoned. So the rocks are actually reminiscent of kind of early Venetian Renaissance painting. Mm-hmm. And so the townsfolk come to find him, but they come in their festival outfits. So when Francis sees them, he assumes that he has to have an outfit to be able to kind of be accepted and fit in with these people. So he makes a series of outfits to horrible results. He's also struck by lightning 3 times. First, he's struck on his feet, which make him a kind of little Bigfoot. The second time, he's struck on his hands, which give him the power to play the piano. And the third time, he's hit on his side, which enables him to think something, and the animals will make patterns that he thinks about. And then the last time he's struck on his head, and then he kind of goes mad.
And that's a spoiler alert. We won't say anything else about it because...
Okay.
Yeah. Mirroring anything in your own life? Or transfiguring aspects of yourself?
Well,
do you see it as imagination solely, or do you see it as metaphor for...
He's sort of based on Sabu. Do you remember Sabu?
Oh,
Yeah.
Things we don't let kids read nowadays, but yeah. Luckily, we don't have kids, so
that's right.
Yeah.
I always loved the Sabu movies when I was young, and so I sort of modeled him on Sabu, and I think that. And then there's all of this kind of religious imagery because, St. Francis of Assisi received the stigmata in those same places where Francis is struck. And then, the title is Francis from Francis of Assisi, who talked to the animals, and Rothbart, who is the evil prince in Swan Lake, because Rothbart has the animals sort of do his bidding. And so I thought that those two things together would be a kind of interesting mashup. And, I go to see the ballet all the time. I've seen probably 50 different productions of Swan Lake over the years. And so it isn't specifically biographical at all. Mm-hmm. Except I think there is a queer sensibility in the book. And gay people of a certain age,
Wait,
I'm
gay?
65.
I'm just kidding. Go on.
Yeah. Almost feel like they were raised by wolves because their parents were not necessarily terribly accepting. And I was lucky enough to have some good magpies and albino foxes raise me.
Yeah, that's been I'd say the cohort of gay men I've recorded with over the years, generally your age and older. There's a sense of living on the cusp of AIDS, but before the population, the queer population, especially in New York, got wiped out as badly as it did. That sense of, we'll say, grooming in a good way, gay men who could teach younger gay men about culture, about the ballet and the opera and things that you didn't necessarily appreciate, which all led to the irony of my meeting Allegra Kent a couple of months ago and not knowing who she was, but telling her that this is going to be the moment when I come off as a moron because you're going to turn out to be famous and I don't know. And she's like, well, Balanchine liked the way I danced. I'm like, yeah, okay, so we are. And your name is Allegra Kent. I'm like, thank you. I will now go feel stupid when I Google this. But yeah,
Allegra Kent, you want to hear a good Allegra Kent story?
Please. She's not a listener yet. I didn't get her email. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Allegra Kent, with Balanchine, there's like 3 specific types that he likes. He likes the Spitfire, the one who can dance quickly and is kind of small and fast. He likes the Amazon woman who's like large and can balance and is sort of stoic. And then he likes the ethereal beauty. And the ethereal beauties that, like Suzanne Farrell was one of the ethereal beauties, and Allegra Kent was one as well. And I never got to see her dance, only on film. But like Joseph Cornell never missed an Allegra Kent performance. He was totally fixated on her. And Robert Wilson would always talk about Allegra Kent. So my friend Gary, who was a great choreographer and dancer, was teaching at the Yale summer dance school. So it might have been Harvard, might have been Yale. I can't remember. But Allegra Kent was one of the teachers there. And so when he came back for the summer, I said, like, what was Allegra Kent like? What was she like? And he said, what she would do every morning is she would make jewelry out of baby vegetables on her wrist, a necklace that she would then eat throughout the day. And I thought, wow, that's really good.
That's the ethereal beauty thing.
That's the ethereal beauty thing. Yeah. So, yeah, I thought you would like the vegetable jewelry.
And I will share other goofy stories about her and Joseph Campbell afterwards. But, that sense, though, of, again, as you came of age as a gay man in New York, or were you?
Oh yeah, no. I went to high school in the Bronx, and actually, when I was in high school in the Bronx, there was an English teacher who told us that if we sold buttons at intermission at City Center, you could get to see anything you wanted at City Center. So, and in those days, City Center was the Joffrey, Alvin Ailey, and Martha Graham. So when I was in high school, we would go. My friends, we would just go and sell buttons, and I saw all of the repertory of those three companies, and it was kind of amazing. Actually, the Graham stuff was very interesting for me to see because there were always narratives. Or most of the dances that she would do would have these kind of mythical narratives, but told in this very kind of abstracted way. So I was, and that then kind of led to me getting more involved in this kind of avant-garde theater thing. That because I wanted to be a figurative artist, but I went to Cooper Union and they wanted me to be to do tasteful abstractions or conceptual art. And it was like, no, I want to make pictures of things. So that really the only interesting work that I could find during that time was in the theater, the sort of artist theater, the Richard Foreman, Andre Zerban, Wilson. And then I was lucky enough to work with Wilson and he did, he taught me a lot about culture. But the truth is my girlfriend at the time, that we're the ones who we went to the opera ourselves. You know, we went to the theater ourselves. And that was, a kind of, you know, it's a lifelong interest. And now I live blocks away in the city from, Lincoln Center. So I can walk to Lincoln Center and we go there all the time. My husband and I.
Where did art start for you?
I was one of those kids that
never stopped drawing.
Yeah, that I was always good at it, and my parents, for a little while, would give us lessons. I'm one of 6 kids, so you know, my sister took ballet classes, my brother took guitar lessons, and I took the art classes. And I actually learned a lot of bad things that I had to relearn from those. Just bad
technique?
Yeah, bad technique. Okay. Taught by nuns at the College of New Rochelle. It was just something that I always did and that I was always kind of good at. And that I was sometimes asked to do things. Like I remember when I was in the 6th grade, there was a woman who directed plays at the local elementary school. And so they were doing The Sound of Music. And not only did I play Rolf, they came to me and said, you're going to do a painting of the Alps that will completely fill the back of the auditorium wall. And I said, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. And it was like, no, you're going to do it. And so they brought me all of these old political posters that I painted on the back of the political posters because they were really big, and we pieced them all together. And I had to do the rendering of it and then scale it up. And I painted it in my basement, and it was up there they couldn't get it down because they glued it up. It was up there for years and years and years. My Alps with the little convent on the.
And now you could do it with, an asteroid coming in or
now
dinosaurs.
I could do it, a dinosaur, a Julie Andrews dinosaur. So no, it was something that I always kind of did. And I always drew better than other people. And, when I was a kid in school, the kids would always, when it was a rainy day, kids would always come around my table and watch me draw. So. And
again, it was actually something that was, we'll say, rewarded, just in terms of getting good attention, as opposed to you're some weirdo who.
It was both.
Well, of course, we're always weirdos. But,
it was both. It was both.
Intimidated by the Francis Rothbard project? Was there a point of, I say, what am I getting myself into, or do I really know how to tell a story in this form?
I didn't worry about that part. Yeah. I figured I could handle that. What was very frustrating is that I decided to do it not in a traditional cartoony drawn way.
Yeah.
So that there are all those people that the Scott McClouds want, think that it should be a blank face and it should look like, the Peanuts. They're just the big,
the iconographic face. Yeah.
I never thought that was so interesting. So one of the things that was probably the most challenging is having the consistency. Like Francis wears a bandolier of pearls that goes across his chest. And, sometimes I would draw it and it would be on the wrong side. And to draw all those pearls, it was like, why did I do
don't trust
this?
me. That's my exact vibe looking at this. Why would he do this to himself and have to paint and draw all these things?
Yeah. But that's part of the nuttiness, you got to go for it. You got to say okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it beautifully. Which is also kind of a queer sensibility, that it's like, I want ornaments on everything. And, it's a challenge, and you need a lot of sharp pencils. I'd have hundreds of black pencils and hundreds of white pencils all sharpened. And then I would just sort of go at it. And it was, I find drawing very kind of therapeutic and calming, and I like to go into that world.
And this didn't destroy that for you? I'm just kidding. Again, all those little pearls must have,
Well, yeah.
I know. There's a frustration aspect, but it's still my discovery, and I've talked about this on the show before, taking up drawing 2 years ago this week. It was end of January 2021. Discovering that, looking outside or sitting outside and drawing something, again, usually a tree, everything cut out in my brain. It was just, the eye, the hand, the paper, and that was it. I'm like, oh, that's what calmness is like. I had no idea. You could actually
Absolutely.
not be thinking and hearing the voices all the time.
Absolutely. No. And you want to hear one of my drawing lines that I would say when I would teach my drawing classes? A drawing is a map of where the eye has been. Write that down.
Yeah, I'm putting down the timestamp for it so I can pull it out later.
No, and that's actually the way that I would teach drawing is that, first you would do the blind contour where you wouldn't look at the page and you would just get your eye-hand coordination going. And then I would have them just draw on the page, compose the page just with line. And then very slowly I would have them kind of break the forms of light and shade into shapes, almost like a paint by number. And then I would teach them how to unidirectionally hatch. And that was the because most of these kids knew how to draw anyway, but I was like breaking them down and doing it like a ballet bar where you really sort of learn how to do that unidirectional hatching so that you get it into your hand. And that's actually one of the hardest things when people are learning how to draw, is that very often they can be very self-conscious about the mark that they're making and be like kind of, it's not good enough.
See, my great realization, destruction is my métier. I've learned, like from the Ed Sorel side of things, I'm like, I'm fine starting with pen. I'm fine with discovering I can't go back. I've got to keep going forward because there's no erasing what I just put down on the paper.
Sure.
You know, there are other things I do an awful lot in pencil too, but you know, that was the discovering the commitment level of this is going straight to ink, and whatever's on this page, I'm going to have to work through, but you know.
Well, and, you know, like on my pages, I would actually have to sort of very carefully lay it out and draw the sort of basic outline.
Yeah.
But then when I would render it, I would start on the upper left and work my way across because I'm right-handed. And the type, because it's all hand-lettered.
Yeah.
And I would even do things where, you know, if I was doing the text in white, I would have to cut back in with the black all around it, or, you know, to make it kind of stand out. And some days I would just be doing text pieces, and those were probably the hardest days. Those are intense.
I could imagine the impatience of trying to get and you discover you just screwed up a line. Like a line of text. In the
and also I'm kind of dyslexic, and I'm a bad speller, and so all of that was I had to learn how to correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
But again, one of the most amazing things I've ever come across in this form. So you know, you delivered. You know.
Well, thank you. I because I don't really come from a cartooning tradition. I felt that I could break rules, and that I didn't have to follow a lot of the rules that exist and are being taught. And that was actually a kind of liberating thing, so that I would be going into these cartooning classes taught by great comic artists. A lot of what was being taught was the sort of canon. And it's only people like Gary Panter who sort of go out there, or Keith Marison as well, that they would kind of go into places that were dangerous and weird. And
I will tell you my off-mic Gary Panter stories when we finish, only because some of them have to be off-mic for my secret identity.
I adore the man.
You know, he was actually the first real artist I ever met. I was about 25
really?
This is the part I can tell. I was at the licensing fair. I used to work in trade magazines, with the licensing fair at the Javits Center in New York City, going to interview various movie studios and animation companies and blah, blah, blah for the magazine I was working for, a business magazine. And then I finished up and was just walking up and down the aisles, and I see Gary Panter, LLC. He was there to show off different products he could license to different companies. And I just, holy shit, Gary Panter. And he just, ducks in a panic like I'm about to serve him papers or something. I was like, oh my God, no, I'm a huge Jimbo fan. And he, really? So we just sat and talked for like 3 hours that afternoon, came back the next day and shot the breeze with him for a while. But as we talked and certain weirdnesses came out, I was like, but keep in mind, Gil, this is the first true artist you've ever met in your life. So, he's going to see things a little differently than your white suburban world out in northern New Jersey. So, we stayed in touch on and off over the years. But, he's again, when you mention comics and rules, then you take Gary and go in the other direction completely.
Yeah, no, and he was actually, when I took over as chair of the illustration and cartooning departments at SVA, he was one of the first people I hired, and David Mazzucchelli was the other one that I needed, because before that it was sort of before I took over as chair, it was very neo adventure comic the DC Marvel, the tools that you would be a penciler or an inker or a letterer,
sort of cartoonist.
And that just seemed like the past, not the future.
They can go to the Kubert School or something for that sort of thing.
And also, there were no women in the whole department. It was all men, and that changed over the 20 years radically. Yeah. I actually had Raina Telegemeyer as one of my students in illustration, and now she's kind of changed the face of a lot of comics for young adults, and particularly women's voices. Some of it might be a little too consistently juvenile, which is maybe a little bit of a problem with the generation that is extremely interested in
YA sort of.
And remaining that way.
It feels to me, and this is us shooting off on a completely different tangent, it feels like the post-Harry Potter, like the people who were raised on that sort of fiction just kind of trying to hold on to that for the next couple of decades of their life. Not Harry Potter, of course, because J.K. Rowling's now,
Yeah. No, I think that's a part of it. It's also part of the whole, anime phenomenon.
Sure.
And, it's kind of an interesting, because also this book, even though it has a young protagonist character, it ain't for kids. It's an adult work, and actually, it's difficult. I mean, I know that it's a hard piece to kind of wade through, because the language is complicated, the vocabulary is complicated. There's the story has different divertissements in it, so that it's not just a kind of straight comic narrative. It's complicated, and I kind of wanted it that way, in the way that you kind of approach an operatic work, and that there's leitmotifs that come back, and so that's why the only thing I could think of calling it was a graphic opera.
And finding a publisher in Fantagraphics?
That was easy.
Yeah.
Actually, Gary Panter said, talk to Eric Reynolds and send it to him. And I did, and he said, okay. And I didn't even, when I made it, people are saying well, is this going to be published? Are you doing this? It's like, no, I'm just making it. So I didn't really show it to anybody until it was finished.
Wow. Okay. I wasn't sure if it was partway through.
I actually, because I had the chairman position, I didn't have to worry about money.
Sure.
And I just wanted to make it. And so that's what I did.
Again, you're talking to a guy who does this every week for no money whatsoever.
That's right. So, and you actually don't make any money from comics. No. So that's the other thing as well, that it's not a...
Yeah, how much do you have to train the students or teach the students about that? Or did you at SVA when they want to study cartooning? And I find this with MFA programs and people in that world too. The non-art side of things, the business and the life, how much do you have to, or did you try to prepare them for that part of it?
A little bit, but the truth is everybody's life is different.
Sure.
And so if I told people about how I survived, their situation's going to be different.
I was at a festival once recording with Mimi Pond, who I've done a few shows with. And we were doing a live one at CXC in Columbus, and she mentioned the key to being a successful artist was to marry well. And apparently that did not go over well with the younger people at the festival, who took it as a, you're telling me I can't make it in comics. And she was like, well, yeah, pretty much, you're...
The only thing that I really would stress was that I would get very upset if anybody was late to the class. so that if anybody was 15 minutes late, they would have to bring donuts for the entire class because it's rude.
Yeah.
And I learned very early on, if you are no trouble, if you show up, if you do your homework, if you don't ever miss a deadline, if you are responsible, if you'll give 500% when you're only asked to do 100%, you will be
a go-to,
and you will have a career.
Yeah.
Because there are too many flakes in the world. So if you show up and you do it, then you're going to be fine. And there are people like that. And then there are other people that I guess maybe aren't as obsessive about art, because you kind of have to be very obsessive about it to be able to have a career. And some people just want to have it because of a lifestyle. And a lot of times those people don't, they
disappear,
end up doing different things. Yeah.
It's a weird question, but as long as we're sticking with the book, costume design. The costuming is as you mentioned, one of the recurring motifs in the book itself. Is it an area that you had a big affinity for prior to this?
Actually,
okay.
Of
Again,
course.
With your opera background, I wasn't sure if that's...
No, but I mean, even as a kid, I was part of the generation where we were placed in front of a television set. And there was a lot of really weird children's programming back then. Really weird. That, there were the marionette shows, like
Kukla, Fran, and Ollie.
No. This was like Fireball XL5, and they were like...
okay. And then Thunderbirds.
Thunderbirds are go.
Yeah.
And then there was another one which was really creepy, which was called Diver Dan. And Diver Dan had these fish puppets. And then Diver Dan had a big metal diving helmet. And so you only saw the little circle of his face through it. And then there was a mermaid that was also in it. And she was always shot through gauze. But to make it even weirder, the whole thing was shot in front of glass panels with fish and bubbles.
So you're all filtering.
And it was all it was just the creepiest, weirdest. So, my folks wouldn't take me to a museum, but they would take us to like the Ice-capades. And, and so I always had an interest in the sort of way that things look. And I was always kind of interested in how people dressed, and so of course the costuming was important, and also I love Adrian, who was the big Hollywood fashion designer who designed the Wizard of Oz. There's some Bosch in there, and I actually I got to design a production of Salome for the Hawaiian opera.
Okay.
How can you turn down the Hawaiian opera?
Yeah.
So the director of the Hawaiian opera asked me to design their Salome, which I did as sort of with a kind of rotting garden motif. So I have so yeah, there are major costumes in this thing.
And just artistic influences in general, both in the book and in your other work. Like you mentioned Bosch, who I can see in a...
Well, I mean, it goes through...
apocalyptic sense.
It goes through different phases. Right now, I'm very much kind of into the Venetian painters, Titian and Carpaccio and Bellini. And Bellini is referenced specifically in the book that there's a spread that refers to the St. Francis painting that's in the Frick. But no, I love all kinds of different things. And it sort of filters into the work. This is part of my art library is in here in the studio, but in the city I have many more. I'm a kind of art book junkie.
Yeah. Did you feel a moment of knowing your style? I have no idea for real artists as opposed to my bullshit activities. The moment when you find that you've actually gotten your own, not that it's consistent.
I don't think I have a style.
Okay.
I'm always kind of amazed if somebody says that I have a style because I don't think I have one.
Okay.
And if I thought I had one, I'd probably change it. Mm-hmm. So it's something that I just don't even think about.
Yeah, no, trust me. The very first cartoonist I ever recorded with was Bob Sikoriak, who, Bob does those pastiches of other things. I said, what's your actual drawing style and look? Because you're great at doing pastiches of every other cartoonist out there. Oh, I don't have an individual style. I'm not interested in self-expression at all. I was like, wow, that's certainly interesting. And I did not follow up at the time. We did in a subsequent conversation. But that was my very first, yeah, I guess artists are not what I think they are. they might have a different way of seeing the world.
I have a sensibility.
Yeah.
And actually one of the things about the sensibility that is, I think, particular to all of the things that I've done is that it's emotional. Mm-hmm. And that actually happened through the AIDS crisis. Yeah. That I had to sort of get out the pain and the grieving through my art. It was the only way I could do it. And so because of that, I've always tried to deal with what was going on emotionally in my life on the canvas or on the page. In fact, one of the most harrowing parts of the book, spoiler alert, involving the animals, was I was drawing those when my husband was going through cancer treatment, and that was super intense, and it needed to be. And those pages, they're really horrible, but they're really glamorous. And to have that kind of strange balance where you kind of lure people in because it's so pretty, and then once they get there, they see what it is, and you're kind of like slapping them in the face. Yeah. And that is something that I have kind of done in the past, where you kind of, lure them in. I actually had a little survey show that traveled around a long time ago, and I called the show Nosegays and Knuckle Sandwiches. Yeah. Because that's kind of one of my modus operandi, where it's like you see the little flowers and bam.
Yeah. Oh, those pages are horrifying in the book. I mean, I'll say was revolted, but had to keep going. Just looking, I'm like, I know he's doing this for a reason, and these are, again, beautiful to look at in how they're rendered, but what they're rendering is absolutely grotesque.
Yeah.
Good job. But don't worry, kids. Just
I actually know. Yeah. I thought I did a good job. I mean, I wanted to kind of go to a place where people don't go, and just to see what that would look like. And I don't want to just
be cute or safe.
Be cute or safe. That's not what art is about. And that's actually one of the things the Fantagraphics will sort of embrace that. You know, Eric Reynolds, the gentleman that I worked with, when he finished reading the book, he said, "You just threw it all down there, didn't you?" And it was like, yes, I did. And, you know, it's going to try a lot of people's patience. They might buy the book because they think it's pretty, but then once they get into it, it's just like, no, I can't do that. I can't go there. I hope that people can go there. Some people have seemed to like it. There's also a kind of frank sexuality in it, which I felt was important to do.
But not exploitive. Again, it's not a salacious thing.
No.
It's again, primitive in a certain, gorgeously represented. And, actually, you have the sex at the very beginning, too. That's well done, by the way.
Thank you.
I'll give you credit for that.
But no, there's you know, like there's a ostrich penis in it, which a lot of people don't know what ostrich penises look like, but
and haven't thought about
you
it.
could
but now,
Google search it.
Yes. But when you talk about again, like that response to your husband's cancer treatments, and as you talked about with working through AIDS and that era and what you felt, I hesitate, or it's a weird question to ask, but that sense of survivor's guilt of being one of the people who lived through that era?
No, it's not guilt. It's that you have to kind of bear witness.
Yeah,
and that's a completely different thing. And, you know, I'm damn lucky that I survived. And, you know, it does become tricky because there are not too many, gay artists of my age.
And that's what I was getting at, by the way, earlier about the shepherding younger gay men along, and you know how when you lose a huge amount of those people, what gap does it leave for the next generation?
It's a big one. Yeah. It's a big one, and you know, it's funny. I have two artist friends in San Francisco, and we always get together whenever I go out there because there aren't too many of us left. So it's a curious thing.
I recorded with Admin White a few years ago, and it was, for him, it's a particularly unique position, being somebody who was positive from the late 80s onwards and still
right
seeing the world as it goes by, and having a particular role within it.
Well, and actually the pandemic didn't help either.
That's sort of my question. And early on, I asked Samuel Delaney, when the pandemic first hit, I started doing daily shows with past guests. I would just call during lockdown from like March until June. I would just, hey, holding up, what's going on? We just talk for half an hour, and I would just post it immediately. And I've known Samuel Delaney for, I don't know if you know him, writer, queer, science fiction, literary theory, blah, blah, blah. But known him for decades. And we're recording that April, and I was sort of trying to get at what parallels he saw between, you know, what we were going through in lockdown and his experiences during the AIDS years. Completely nothing. Just saw absolutely no connection and no. And again, we were in the middle of everything, and everybody was in a weird state of mind back then. So I don't know if he, you know, evolved in that thinking, but which is a way of getting around asking, you know, how was a pandemic, and do you see parallels with?
Oh, sure, because people died,
right?
But sort of everybody was experiencing it. So no, I had some post-traumatic stress stuff going on, and it was rough. I mean, I think a lot of it I've kind of erased from my memory. You know, that the whole idea of how to do a drawing class on Zoom. I became the master of annotate, actually, where you can actually draw on top of somebody else's drawing. Yeah. That was helpful. But yeah, no, I had to have the barn Wi-Fi'd, and I taught it all from that table over there, and all the meetings. And I mean, it was rough. Like I would be in here on the computer all day, and I hated that. I don't know how people who have to sort of stare at a screen all day do it. So no, there were some the sort of fragility of life was something that was very, very similar to some of the things that happen with AIDS.
In terms of leaving SVA or retiring during the middle of that?
Well, it was sort of toward the end of the pandemic that, well, we're still in the pandemic.
I know, that's are we past, are we not? I finally got it a month and a half ago, so I consider we're now past the pandemic.
Oh, yeah. I still have not gotten it.
I'm so pissed off. Customer in my association, hey, Gil, we're going to be in New York. We want to meet for lunch at Bryant Park Grill on December 21st. Great. I'll just go get COVID now, and I'm going to charge you double on your dues next year because I'm so pissed off at you. But 3 days later, I'm like, God damn it. Just the most touristy place they could have possibly dragged me, and no mask at all. So anyway, that's just me venting. But we're now past the pandemic because I've had it. So.
Well, we're not past the pandemic. But what was happening was I even took the chair gig because it was a challenge. Like I wasn't really good at public speaking. I was the weird, crazy tattooed guy in a position of authority. I had to write and speak and represent the school. And I had to develop a curriculum, and I had to do all of these things that I was not that I didn't really know how to do. And so it was a huge challenge in the beginning. But I did it for 20 years. And at the 20-year mark, I realized that I wasn't learning so much from the experience. And the students were more fixated on the technical and less on the conceptual. And so I was realizing that all I could really talk about was the technical. And that became kind of boring to me. So it was time for me to kind of leave at the top of my game. The department grew, like it quadrupled. It was winning all of the awards all over the world. It was rated the best illustration department in the country. It was like, okay, I can go now.
It's only downhill from here. In a sense, at least if you start to feel like you're...
And I had finished the book. I had left the gallery that I had been showing with for 20 years. And it was sort of time to change things up a little bit. So, and I was feeling like a dinosaur.
Which we're going to talk about the paintings soon, but yeah.
And so, the Me Too movement, the
You haven't been canceled or anything, have you?
I was kind of canceled a little bit.
Okay. I don't recall anything, and I've made it a point of pride that just coincidentally nobody I've ever recorded with has been significantly blown up.
No, there were students that were saying horrible things about me for a little while there on the Twitter. But I mean, it sort of goes along with the whole kind of nasty Trump era insanity. So it was basically that they were attacking the school in general, which was happening in every school.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of the pages, the page designs were all identical during those moments too. So it might have been some kind of
AstroTurf, fake grassroots thing.
Yeah. But it was weird, and I had to kind of move on from that too. But But the truth is that it's, I'm going to be doing a conversation with Keith Marison at Rizzoli in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think February 10th. I thought I saw.
Yeah, it's February 10th. And the truth is that we sort of changed comics and illustration and fine art in many ways through our time there at SVA.
Do you think about legacy? I mean, I'm sure in that period of deciding to retire, there was what have I done? Have I lived up to what I should do? But do you think about legacy in terms of your work?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Because you get to see people doing good. Yeah. There's nothing more thrilling than seeing people do good. Mm-hmm. And yeah. I mean, my guys. That it's lovely to see people out in the world functioning and making interesting things. Mm-hmm. Like one of my students was James Jean, who now just did the poster for The Whale. And he did the posters for the Pinocchio movie. Oh, wow. And he did the poster for, as well as making art and showing all over the world.
Also doing things that are publicly.
Yeah. He's big.
Are you glad, by the way, you got out before the AI art thing?
Oh my God. I
recorded with Dave McKean like in the middle of last year when this was starting to take off, and he had some real thoughts. But
well, you know what? It's like I've always said, if you know how to draw, it's money in the bank, and there's always something that you can do if you know how to draw. But I think that what's going to happen is it may really cut into concept artists. But I mean, the same thing happened when Photoshop happened, where, all of those very realistic painters that were doing all that illustration, all that kind of bad surrealist illustration, when the Photoshop things happened, they could do it very easily, and they didn't have to have the realism of the illustrator. And a lot of those people took a real cut, and a lot of them turned to doing portraiture and things. So, it's going to be what it's going to be, but I don't feel. There's something about looking at an original drawing or an original painting that is unlike anything else. And to see that hand right there. I remember the first time I went to the Metropolitan Museum, I went by myself. And I was in the 7th or 8th grade, and my father was driving into the city, and he dropped me off, and I walked up those steps, and I walked up the other set of steps, and I walked up the other set of steps. And the first room I walked into were the Van Goghs. And seeing those paintings, which I knew because I had a little book on Van Gogh, seeing them in original, and to say, like, this object was in his possession and he put that paint down on it, was so thrilling. And I will never forget that moment. And it's something that I think about sometimes when I'm making my own pictures. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like sort of being in the presence of someone great and seeing it right in front of you.
First art you went to go see after lockdown? Do you remember going to a museum or an exhibition?
I can't recall.
Okay. Do you tend to go when you're in New York, or when you're in the city? Do you tend to go to galleries and museums all the time?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I actually just got back from Washington, where Fred and I went down to see the Carpaccio show at the National Gallery, because I'm such a geek. And there have been when I do go into town, I like to kind of keep booked because I can draw in my apartment, but this is my studio up here. So I like to go and see things when I'm in town, most definitely.
And so I have to get to the Hopper. That was going to be part of my, the Hopper at the Whitney.
Yeah.
My whole Christmas to New Year's week that got blown up by COVID and my idiot client, it was all set up. I'm going to record with James McMullen. I'm going to go from there to the Whitney. I'm going to spend the day, just taking in the Hoppers and everything has been blown up. But, next weekend I'm supposed to record with him. So
you can go to a museum with the mask. I mean, as soon as things kind of
when
opened
I was positive,
up.
I was also wrecked for a couple of days. I'm immunocompromised in my way. So that first week was not fun at all. Still got the COVID cough 5 or 6 weeks later. But tell me about painting and tell me about the dinosaurs who are surrounding us. Because I see them on the little, I saw the little representations on screen, when I was reading about your show last year, and it doesn't mean the same thing as seeing these big old canvases in front of us.
Well, sometimes what I do is kind of dumb, but I take the dumb thing and I like hold on to it and I won't let go until it becomes not so dumb. So I've painted self-portraits as the crying clown early on in my career. I did an apple a day, as I had mentioned, to wish people well. So, sometimes I do things that are just kind of, dumb. And the idea that I was feeling like a dinosaur, and I would start painting dinosaurs. And it is it's like a thing, like dino art. It's, kind of usually bad, and it's usually with dinosaurs being really mean and nasty and eating things and eating each other. And I began to think about this idea of the kind of fey, emotional beast.
And sort of graceful.
And graceful. Yeah.
They don't look plodding. I mean, they have mass and heft, but they look like they're.
But it's also, waiting for the end of the world and to try to do it with grace. And so the pandemic part of it was about this end of the world thing. So these paintings are once again, there's a structure to it where in every picture there's a dinosaur, there's a moon, there's a rainbow, and there's the asteroid. So every single picture has that in it someplace. And so it's like the Goldberg variations. It's like taking this tune, this thing, and then kind of reinventing it with each one. And I also have been doing these kind of tropes that are somewhat familiar. So that this one is a Three Graces, and to do with Three Graces dinosaurs, what? Or this other one is the Dance of Death, because I thought it was such a great idea I went to see the Holbein show, where they had all. At the Morgan, and they had all of those Dance of Death things that he did, which were so tiny. I was so shocked to see how small they were. And I thought the idea of a dinosaur dancing with a dinosaur skeleton would be an excellent idea for a painting.
I'm sure I got my little Holbein sketch in here somewhere, but
yeah, and yeah. Oh, there you go.
I was standing there at the wall trying to
I know, because they were so tiny. And so I did this painting when I had just heard that my nephew had unexpectedly died at 28 of a heart issue. And once again, I was just so gutted because, my brother is going through a very, very difficult time. And thought, well, okay, once again, I'll just put it into the painting. So it keeps me from getting emotionally paralyzed to be able to kind of make a picture. So whether or not that's expressed when you look at it, I have no idea. But it's something that I've always been able to do to keep myself sane.
Do you consider yourself sane?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
No. I consider myself quite sane.
I'll have to check that question off then.
Yeah.
As somebody who, again, draws, doesn't necessarily consider himself an artist, when's a painting done? Do you have a moment of...
Yeah, I always kind of know when it's done. And maybe I kind of fuss on them too much. Yeah. But it's when I believe it. That there's particularly when you're doing a figurative picture, that there are certain things about the space, there's certain things about the color, there's certain, I work on it until I believe it. Yeah. And then it's kind of done. And I always say I'm kind of like the kid putting on the puppet show in the basement, but I don't even want to have my parents come down and see it.
What do you miss about teaching?
I miss teaching drawing because it's kind of it's almost like a religious rite for me. Yeah. I would always have to tell the kids in the beginning of the class that I will touch them because there's something about like the laying on of hands, and I'll whisper to them, and they're not allowed to listen to any music. It's just like this kind of intense, weird thing. And I love to do that. I love to sort of help a young person to be able to draw really well. And that's probably the biggest thing that I'll miss. And it's the vampire in me likes to experience talented young people. And so I will try to do that, and I'm trying to maintain relationships with students who are doing amazing things who have graduated. But see, that's also, that was another reason why I decided to retire when I retired was from teaching. I'm not retired, was that I had this amazing class. I had like a dream team class that got us through the whole COVID thing because they were just so delightful, so amazing. So, but that doesn't happen often. That every once in a while you'll have like 2 or 3 really great ones in a class, and then there are the other ones that you got to kind of pull along. So that can become frustrating. And, sometimes there were people that were international students who had communication issues. So you couldn't really get through sometimes, or that their cultures were so different that, it was hard to kind of find the connections.
There was a mention in the New York Times profile of you last year about the entire semester erasing and correcting a single sketch that you put students through.
Well,
Exaggeration?
It's not a sketch.
Okay.
No, that would be the first semester of my torture therapy drawing class. It would be a full year class, and it wasn't a sketch. It would be, I would get a great big piece of paper, a very heavy rag paper. Mm-hmm. And what they would do is they would draw on it in fine charcoal, and then I would have them wipe it off and then redraw it, adjusting it slightly. Because one of the things that happens, like this big painting right here, this is 2 days into it. So I've just been working on this for 2 days. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of correction that will happen now at this point, because I did the preliminary drawing over there.
Yeah.
And then I got it up onto the canvas, and it's already changed from the preliminary drawing. And now I can see how, like, that leg is wrong and that leg is wrong. And I actually am going to start to put these patterns on the dinosaurs themselves. That's actually why I have that pair of boots over there, is because I'm going to reference the skin on the boots on the dinosaur. And so when you're making a piece, you can't be afraid to actually revise it, and revise it carefully. Like, one of the things that happens when you're drawing is that, like, you can pull off a quick sketch. Like, pulling off a quick sketch is kind of easy. And most people can kind of do that. But the idea of actually getting the curve exactly right, or getting the pieces of the puzzle to actually make sense, perfect sense, that's what's hard, is the composing of it. And so that was one of the things that I wanted to tell them, because before that, they would, like, just go in and they'd do a bunch of quick sketches. And the other thing is, I would have one model for the entire year. Because what happens is, when you're in a drawing class, you have you drawn a lot of naked people?
No,
you haven't done that.
No, that's my thing. I live out in the woods, so getting access to an art class or anything, the humor of it is, the only times I've ever drawn anybody is in, and this is a reveal that everybody who listens to the show knows, is in the waiting room at the oncologist. I've got a leukemia that's not bad. It's the best bad news, blah, blah, blah. So not a bad thing. But I go every 6 months, and what I've learned is no one looks up in the oncologist waiting room. So that's a perfect time to draw people, because they're not going to notice you're drawing them. Because everybody is looking down, nobody makes eye contact, so it just kind of scribble away.
What happens when you go to art school is that you actually get to see naked people. Right. And I actually vividly remember the first naked model I ever drew. And
I went to Society of Illustrators one night to hang out with Joe Ciardello and John Cuneo during sketch night. They were playing jazz, and I grabbed a pad and a pencil just so I could fake it if I needed to, and walked in, and 3 naked people up on the tables while I just kind of... Yeah.
Well, and what would happen would be, when you encounter a naked person in a class, you kind of fall in love. And so you're sort of lovingly drawing the breasts, or you're lovingly drawing the head, or you're loving, because it's like, oh, here's this naked person, and I am a person relating to this. So there isn't a lot of objectivity. And what will happen is that will sort of take up a lot of time, the falling in love with the naked person. So that was why my strategy was to have the same model for the entire year. The students come into work, the model comes into work, everybody's just working, and you don't have that kind of, like, seduction thing.
Because with all relationships, the more exposure we get, the more we end up hating each other. That's great. I love that. Or we just get bored with each other.
It becomes a given.
I'm kidding, but it's an ingenious idea.
And in the second semester, I would sometimes bring in another model to have, like, 2 people there.
Yeah.
And, so I would build. I wasn't withholding that much affection. Just in the first semester, I would make it a little rough, because the truth is, I had a drawing teacher, Susan Ferguson Gussow, who was so mean to me. She was a piece of work, and she broke me of all of my bad habits that I had, and I will always be thankful for her for breaking those bad habits that I had.
But you don't want to put your students through quite the same degree of cruelty.
Well, I would be frank. I would be frank. No, and like the arty marks. See, the arty marks are something that, in fact, I would, like, call someone arty marks.
That was one of my lessons. The more little lines I put in, I could fake it and make it seem like it was real. As you said, like with sketches. It's close enough.
When people know that they can do that arty mark thing, it kind of works my nerves.
Yeah.
Because it's fake. It's like, fake expressionism, or what, the drip Don't get me started. The control drip. And actually, they taught me how to do the control drip in a painting class once. And it was just like, really? We're learning how to do fake drips?
Just the Cooper Union days?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. It precedes you, because it was when I was recording with Brian Doherty about his book on the underground cartoonists. So many of them couldn't deal with art school because a little bit before your time, but in the 50s and into the 60s, they were all, you need to be abstract, and they were like, yeah, I want to draw figuratively, and they all got kicked out, and they end up figuratively creating, the underground comics as we know them.
Yeah, well, actually, Steve Brodner also had Tsukasa and hated her.
Yeah,
and she hated him. So, but of course, Brodner's one of the greatest draftsmen of our day. He's the Daumier of our age.
Yes, who once looked me over at an art exhibition, and this is before I had the hair. It was really 4 different artists staring at me simultaneously. The story was, I recorded with Barry Blitt a week earlier, and they said, "Did Barry draw you?" Somebody asked, and I was like, "No, I don't think anybody I've ever recorded with ever drew me." And they all start looking. Brodner was among them, Friedman, and a few others. They just start looking me up and down for a couple of seconds. And Brodner's like, "Yeah, you got nothing to exaggerate." I was like, that's either the greatest compliment I've ever received or the greatest insult. I'm not sure at this point. I'll take it, whatever it is.
No, but you got a bony face. It's like you got good structure to it.
Subsequently, Chardella drew me recently like this Albrecht Dürer look that I've got on, and nailed it better than, because a few artists have drawn me since. But Joe gave me a drawing of me that I was like, you got it. You managed to get, what's in those little quick lines that Joe puts together.
No.
I'll say you can try later on, but I'm going to look like a dinosaur.
Steve, Barry. I mean, there's a lot of, great draftsmen out there that are. Do
you see it in the younger generation?
Yes.
Okay. I just have no idea. I don't know who's young and those guys are in their 50s into 60s.
Yeah, no. What was great was that 2 of my dream team got into the Society of Illustrator professional show this year and won medals. So, there's some great people out there.
Your first tattoo? And is it one you regret?
No.
Okay. Just because, some people, their first one was like a ballpoint pen thing when they were like 12.
No, my first tattoo is well, you know what the placement of most people's tattoo is in America?
Bicep?
Yes, but wrong arm.
Oh, I'm left-handed, so I did everything on my right side. So in case I got any sort of toxicity,
it's mostly on your. Most people's first tattoo is on their left bicep because of the car.
Oh, there's that. See, yeah, I being left-handed, I just figured if they have to amputate because of a thing, I would at least. Keep the dominant.
So in London,
everybody's on the right. Yeah.
It's the classic skull and dagger with flames. Mm-hmm. And I got it in Baltimore. I was visiting someone and went into this beautiful shop, Tux Farrar's shop, which was a beautiful shop. And I liked the imagery. He had everything sort of plastered around because it was mysterious. I didn't really understand it. But I knew it meant something. And at that time, nobody was really getting tattoos. Fred, who I've been with for decades, he had some tattoos. And I just decided to get one. And then I started to really study it because it was when people were just starting to die. And it was kind of like a armor, like a protection, because a lot of them come from a lot of the images come from heraldry, and I thought of it as an apotropaic act. Do you know what that word is?
I've seen it before, and I'm blanking on it. But apotropaic.
Apotropaic. It actually means having the quality to ward off evil. So, like. Getting a tattoo is an apotropaic act, like a rabbit's foot is an apotropaic object. Not for the rabbit, of course, but so I and it was also at that point super underground, so that it was illegal in New York, and you would have to kind of track down who the cool people were. And because I had a close friend living in San Francisco, I would go to San Francisco fairly often, and that was kind of tattoo central. So when I was there, I collected some more, and then through that, the greatest tattoo artist working was a guy named Ed Hardy, and I managed to get an appointment to see him, and we became good buddies. And eventually, I said to him, "How long would it take me to learn how to do it?" And he said, "A week." And I said, "I got that." So he actually taught me how to do it. So I did it for a little while. And at that point, too, it was one of those things where if you had tattoos, you were part of this kind of interesting club, and it was a certain kind of currency. So I remember at one point I was getting I had a tattoo appointment with Hanky Panky, who's in Amsterdam. And so because I would trade, I would do like a painting of their child, or I would do a painting of their dog, or so I wasn't, like, a lot of cash wasn't going transacting. Yeah. So when I went to see Hank, he was like, "Oh, you must come for dinner." And so I remember like going to this like weird basement home where he lived, and like all of the food was covered with cheese. So there was like cauliflower covered with cheese, and there was meat covered with cheese, and then there were like these little beautiful children running around, and there was like two dogs like licking the poured out stein. So it was just like the paintings, the Dutch genre paintings. And there I was in the middle of it, not knowing this guy. And that would be what would happen. Like, you could sort of go places and meet people and get a kind of inside look, because you were part of the tattooed world, which was very limited at the time. And that was fascinating. So I continued to collect them.
Designing your own at all, or were you getting
What's that?
Designing your own at all, or was it
some I designed, and those I could have probably let the artist do it, and I wouldn't be as critical of them. Mm-hmm. So I stopped. I actually stopped designing them, kind of early on.
Yeah, I had no idea whether that would be the self-canvas thing versus let the artist.
Yeah, you collect.
Deal with the canvas.
Yeah, no, I've sort of collected from a bunch of interesting people, and have a bunch of interesting stories about.
Yeah, so Jim Woodruff was going to design one for me. There's going to one of the, Jim's comics. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of those souls of his, but never got around to it, which is fortunate, because I took up weightlifting in the last year, and as skinny as I look now, I'm about double the size I was a year ago. So,
but the skin stretches.
Yeah, that's what I figure. And better to get it and at least look like I'm hulking up or something.
You'll know when the time is right.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Yeah, and also it isn't for everybody.
No, I got my one right after 9/11, and that was a weird experience, but I was fragged out of my head anyway, so just text, so it's nothing interesting. Or exciting.
And also, I'm the first person who put a tattoo class into a college curriculum.
Yeah.
And because of that, there's all of these kids that are actually making really good money being tattooers.
It is weird how it... We'll say weird, how accepted or how mainstream tattooing went in certain ways.
I know.
Just because when I grew up, it was, sailors and
Well, Ed had a lot to do with it. Ed was the first person who sort of legitimized it and made it, he's the tattoo intellectual. So he made it kind of okay for people to accept it, and actually I knew, because he sold his name to the fashion designer, and and I knew so we were kind of waiting for the fashion line to come out. And it started with hats that were like all jeweled and embroidered with his imagery on it.
It was a tweet from long ago with, "Oh, Ed Hardy, is there nothing you won't embroider?" But anyway.
Well, Ed didn't even pay attention to it, really. That he just sort of sold the designs. And but I remember seeing them for the first time in a store, and it was all these ladies that would buy these hats, and it gave them the experience of going into a tattoo shop and saying, "I want that one." But it was a hat. It wasn't, an actual thing that you would get on your body. So I knew that was going to be big, big, big. And, Ed was so funny. I said to him, "Ed, do you know that your pieces are, your shirts and line is in every window at Macy's now?" And he said, "Oh, really? Oh, they don't tell me anything." He was totally oblivious.
Checks show up, and that's it.
To what happened with that. And of course, it went up, and then it just kind of bombed because the guy that was managing it was.
Did you see the Von Dutch documentary on Hulu?
I did. It was the same guy.
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah, that was something.
Yeah,
well, I'll talk about it off mic, but yeah, that was an experience.
Yeah, it was the same guy that. Yeah.
As a whole field, I had no inherent interest in, but I started watching it. I'm like, I'm completely compelled by this documentary.
I only watched it because of my relationship with Ed, but who is actually like, you talk about Gary Panter, like Ed is kind of a genius, and
the term gets thrown around too much. But when you get people who are actually like
geniuses,
that's Question. You mentioned how Eric Reynolds had said, you put everything, you put all of it here. Is there another book? Are you thinking of?
Well, I'm thinking of other things. I'm thinking, I haven't actually written a play yet. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking of that. And I'm now sort of into making these gigantic paintings. So
is this larger scale than you're accustomed to doing? I don't know anything about your.
These are pretty big. I've made some other big ones, but these are pretty big for me. I don't like actually having to get up on scaffolding.
Right.
And that's I don't know how they do it. They hire people to do it, and then they tell no, because I don't work with assistants at all. I do everything myself. So these are big. So I don't know.
So writing a play and other. Oh yeah, that's what I wonder. Like other forms you might be interested in. Don't say podcast, but other forms. It's a dying medium. I'm just
to you. No, I'm making some notes on I'm getting some notes on play. But see, this is the thing. When I was lucky enough to have the book up at Vito Schnabel's gallery, I put all of the drawings up, and all 300 of them. And what was actually very sweet was that his father, Julian Schnabel, came in to see it as I was sort of deinstalling it. And he said that he was very touched because the story was so complete and completely one person's voice. And that sometimes when you're making a film is so committee-based that it often starts to get away from you. And I thought, oh, that's like a very interesting thing. And I do have friends who do costumes for big movies. Like they just did that movie with The Rock.
Oh, the superhero one?
His last movie, yeah.
Black Adam.
They did Black Adam. Yeah. But they asked me to actually do the kimono for Ghost in the Shell. They did Ghost in the Shell. And it was like you had to sign your life away even to look at the.
Oh yeah, I always tell people my world is an NDA, but what they do in the creative industry, quote unquote, within the entertainment industry.
Yeah. No, it's this corporate craziness that I don't think I could deal with. So the idea of film, not really my thing.
Yeah, because just too collaborative, too much other people's money.
Yeah. No, I'm very much of a guy that kind of likes to work by myself, which is why there might be another comic. I have.
Yeah, I just don't know.
I don't think so.
If something like this felt like you fulfilled, you managed to put a 300-page book together and out. That could be enough to. I don't need to do this again.
Yeah.
I proved I can do it. I made something that some schmuck from New Jersey says he's never seen before. So,
well, and that's the thing. It's. I wanted to see if I could do it, and I think that I did it.
I'm awfully impressed. Last question. What are you reading?
I actually don't read a lot of fiction.
Doesn't have to be fiction. Just
that I actually, in anticipation of the Carpaccio exhibit that I mentioned, I read this beautiful, beautiful little book by Jan Morris. Do you know Jan Morris?
I know the name.
She's like a travel writer and one of the sort of best. And she wrote this book called Ciao Carpaccio, which are just his sort of her musings on his work, and it's beautiful. And then I of course bought the catalog, so I'm reading the essays in the catalog, and I'm actually also reading the texts for the essays with Keith Mayerson's book. My American Dream, which actually has a beautiful little piece by Gary Panter in it. His book is fantastic and is also 10 years in the making. And he thinks of it as a graphic novel, but they're just all these kind of random paintings that kind of tell a story. It's a great book.
Somebody I need to sit down with.
He's fantastic. Yeah. Well, you have to go. He lives in LA, but
I do some remotes.
Okay.
But
Keith is also just so interesting. So I'm very psyched to be doing this conversation with him. And then I'm reading Jess Rolifson's new book released by Fantagraphics called Invisible Wounds. And she was one of my students. And she also taught for me for quite a while. And it's a very intense book about the military. What is I'm blanking on this word. Like when you're out of the military.
Veteran?
Yeah, veteran. I couldn't. Yeah, she interviewed veterans all over the world, or all over America, and just their problems. So it's an intense little comic that she's made. And it's not very cheery. But it's beautiful, and I'm very proud of her. And then the last book that I'm reading at the moment is a book called Fossil Hunters by Adrian Mayer. And it's all about how they would find dinosaur bones, but they wouldn't know what they were. So it's how actually like mythology and fossils kind of go together, because, there'd be some earthquake in Greece someplace, and then these bones would come out, and then they'd make it into a cyclops. My favorite thing is that there was a Protoceratops, which is like a small triceratops. And they lived in the Gobi Desert. And so people would come and hunt for gold in the Gobi, and they would encounter these bones. And what happened was they constructed the griffin from the Protoceratops because of the wings were sort of like the frill of the neck, and they guarded gold, and they like made up this whole thing based on the dinosaur bones. So it's a kind of cool book.
And it sounds like the roots of another project for you, tying into this, but
well, it does
spinning into.
Actually, there's like gold, little bits of gold in the bottom of the paintings.
Speaking of, you mentioned before we started recording another exhibition this fall.
Yes, this September will be my show at Vito Schnabel Gallery, his 19th Street space, which is going to be all of these big paintings. And more.
I recorded with Jerry Saltz a few months ago. I'll give him a nudge, tell him, get over it. Not that I don't know if you have any high or low opinion of him, but
Oh, he's fine.
Everybody has an opinion. Okay. So the only other critics I know, one's dead and the other one's up in Boston.
Sometimes he's okay. No, and he always says hi. He's a nice guy.
Indeed. I always like when pod guests, don't hate each other. I feel okay about life. So, Thomas, thanks so much for coming on. Like I say, this book, you've even in my 50s, I've discovered there are new ways one can tell we'll say a comic story or a graphic story or a graphic opera, whatever we're going to call it. It's a completely
thank you so much for letting me join you, and I'm glad you liked the book and got through it.
Okay, that section near the end was tough, but I bore up, and I figured it was a single person's vision, which, as you said, is kind of rare nowadays.
Well, the book isn't for everybody, and I think that's one of the great things that Oscar Wilde said was the only kind of person who can like all kinds of art is an auctioneer.
And that was Thomas Woodruff. His new graphic opera, Francis Rothbart, The Tale of a Fastidious Feral, from Fantagraphics, is just an absolute marvel of a book, and I hope you'll search it out and give it a read. It really is something. Now, Thomas does not have much of an online presence, but he's on Instagram as Mr. Thomas Woodruff, and he exhibits at Vito Schnabel. I think it's Schnabel. I'm probably screwing that up. Anyway, I'll have links to that stuff in the show and episode notes for this one. You can support the Virtual Memories show by telling other people about it. Just let them know there's this podcast that comes out every week with neat conversations with fascinating creative people. You can also help us out by telling me what you like and don't like about the show, who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or art exhibition or theater or opera you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me a postcard, letter, direct message, email, or by leaving me a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you go over that, just call back and leave a second message. And let me know if it would be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with the listeners, but I would never put something like that in an episode without the speaker's permission. If you got money to spare, don't give it to me. I mean, I spend money to make the show, but it's $20 a month for web hosting, $20 for the remote service I use. This one involved gas and tolls, and I bought a strawberry rhubarb pie at Auntie Elle's in Tuxedo, New York, as a gift to Thomas. Don't know if he ate it yet. I hope he did. It's usually really good pie that they have there. But anyway, don't give me any money. My day job treats me fine. I did start a Substack recently. There's a pay tier, but I haven't started doing paywall content on that yet. What you should do if you have money to spare is help people or institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Crowdfunder, and other crowdfunding platforms. Because there are people out there who need help with medical bills or rent or getting an artistic project off the ground. There are a lot of things you can do for people. When it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank every month. I make donations to the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds. I make targeted contributions to election funds. And, there's Planned Parenthood and Women's Choice. And, there's a whole lot of different funds you can try to support in order to help build a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.